Hello, it's Brad Laurie, or BlockchainBrad, and today we're speaking about all things secret, and more specifically, it's about the Secret Network. And with me, I have one of the key members of the team, and more specifically, the founder of the Secret Foundation, and his name is Tor Bair. Tor, thank you very much for making time to speak with me today.
That's my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And also, mate, just a plug for you quickly, Tor does have his own podcast, and he's very experienced in the industry as well in terms of educating us. So I appreciate that, mate, in terms of being a fellow educator in the space. Now, we're here to talk about Secret Network. And for all those wondering, I am not invested in Secret Network's token. I am here genuinely to try and support Tor as much as I can and really listen in to learn more about what they're building and what they're really doing. So once again, this is all about education and learning, moving forward in the space to help it build. So Tor, the slogan on the website, let's start with that. It's a very basic statement. It says that you're the first blockchain with privacy preserving smart contracts. That's a big thing to claim something as being the first. Mate, do you want to start with that and just really give us a rundown on what it actually means?
For sure. Yeah, that statement kind of breaks down into the what and the why, or really the so what. So the what is what we're claiming is this blockchain with privacy preserving smart contracts. And the reason we can claim that is because it's been an extremely challenging technical journey to build the tech to that point. A privacy preserving smart contract, the way that we define it, is a smart contract that can use encrypted data and use it as an input, use it as outputs, and also you can encrypt the state of the contract. But if you're not very technical, or if you're just new to the space or something, you've probably heard of smart contracts. You may not know why privacy preserving smart contracts are so important, or what some of the challenges with smart contracts today actually are. So I'll start there. The reason privacy is important for smart contracts is because by design, blockchains are public. All the data that they work with, everything that's on the blockchain is public data. And that's why when you go and look at a block explorer for something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, you can see absolutely everything that's happening. So that's by design. Blockchains are supposed to be really good for, that kind of accountability, transparency, so on and so forth. But, that doesn't mean blockchains are good for everything. And that privacy problem, the fact that everything is public by default, means you can't use blockchains actually for very much at all. It's a very narrow scope when you just say we can't have any sort of private data, or we can't choose what's private and choose what's public. So with Secret Network and with privacy preserving smart contracts, what you can do is what we call programmable privacy, and say, here is what I want to be public. Here is what I want to be private under these circumstances and to these people. And now you can design decentralized, permissionless, unstoppable applications, the same way that you can on Ethereum or other blockchain platforms. But it's also giving you the ability to protect users, protect their data privacy, and also protect the security of these platforms. And the analogy I usually use is if you try to say, let's build a decentralized Uber, well, how are you going to do that if everybody knows your address? Right? Usually it's just you want to know your address. The driver should know your address, but not the millions of other users of this application. So programmable privacy means it's only public data to the people you want it to be public data. And that's a really critical foundational pillar of decentralized applications. And it's why it's such a big deal that we've done it.
Got it. Okay. So that's well explained. So in a nutshell, really, it's selective. When you talk about that programmable smart contract, it's making sure that you have that the option of having some that's selectively private in this instance, or secret. And I want to talk about those two words with you later. And then obviously the public. Sure. So looking back in time, if we go back to the first iterations of the permission versus permissionless discussions, which I'm sure, comes up in discussions with you, what's the difference there, Tor, as well, with regard to having that selective programmability built in as opposed to a permission network?
Yeah, so the word private in the blockchain space in particular can be a very confusing word because people have talked about private blockchains. And when they say private blockchains, usually what they mean is permissioned blockchains. Like only certain people can run a node, only certain people can deploy a contract or interact with a contract. That's not the kind of private we mean. So when I talk about those, I specifically do say permissioned. Secret Network is permissionless in the same way that Ethereum is permissionless. Anybody can operate a node. Anybody can interact with the network, deploy an application. It's a public blockchain in that sense. But I say permissionless because it's much more accurate, or at least it's much more descriptive of exactly those defining characteristics of the blockchain. But while it's a permissionless blockchain, it has data privacy. So without getting into a public versus private debate, and we just say it's permissionless blockchain that has data privacy for smart contracts, that's exactly what Secret Network is, and nothing it isn't. It only gets confusing when we start trying to talk about the concept of what is a private blockchain. And then you start thinking about this is an enterprise thing, or this is, it belongs to the government, right? That's not what Secret Network is.
I really appreciate that. And really, we've seen those kind of quadrants out there, those infographics that explain the different types. You clearly fit into the narrative and the tech design of arguably the DeFi space, in the sense that the permissionless nature of this is really conducive to being properly distributed, properly available to everyone in the context of the open source, as you discussed, and transparent nature. But then there's that unique aspect, arguably, that's where the world first comes in, of having that secrecy built in. So it's really interesting. And can I ask you, in that context, what's the motive in terms of for the users? What's the incentive, rather? If we put it in that context for a user, why does that secret aspect or the secrecy matter when we always argue from the outset that transparency is the king? Right.
Rather than make it like a private versus public debate, what I try to do is at least say, like, this is a question about choice for users. And usually the conversation around privacy really is a conversation about choice. If something is public by default, it is extremely hard, pretty much impossible, to make any of that information private again. Like if your password leaks somewhere, it's not like you can re-encrypt it and kind of assume that nobody has seen it. Once it's public, it's public. The analogy I've used elsewhere is to think about it like toothpaste in a tube. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you will not have a good time trying to get the toothpaste back in. So realistically, the toothpaste should start in the tube and you should squeeze it when you want it, and then you have your toothpaste, only when you know you're not going to want to put it back in.
Yeah,
privacy works the same way.
That's a good analogy.
So we have privacy by default, right? Instead of public by default. That's not to say everything in our network needs to stay private from everybody forever, but it's a starting place where when you're private by default and selectively public, you can be sure that the way that your data is being used by a permissionless application is the way that you're intending. And so far in DeFi, it hasn't been a question of how do we make things safer. It hasn't been a question of how do we make users more protected. Really, it's how can we make things go as fast as possible, give as much permissionless leverage as possible, flash loans and everything else. There's a lot of product market fit there because people are clearly interested in doing that sort of thing. But it's not what I would consider to be sustainable. And if we want to turn all of these DeFi applications into sustainable DeFi applications that are still permissionless, but actually benefit the long tail of users, not just the people with the most capital to participate in the system. Privacy is important because that gives everybody the same baseline that you're sort of starting from.
Exactly.
It's private by default and things are public when needed.
Yeah, and Tor, thanks for explaining that, because that's where it does position you differently to the enterprise blockchains that we've seen come out, for some time now, several years. And in that context, when we talk about the businesses that are sort of paying attention to the blockchain and the technologies, the tech stack beneath it, are you finding that already some of those enterprises are actually switching gears and starting to pay attention to the open source permissionless aspect? Because surely there's an inroad for them in this sort of niche area that should grow technologically and also for use case in the future.
It's interesting because when enterprises are researching blockchain for the first time, for a long time, they were researching primarily Bitcoin, and they didn't find what they were looking for with Bitcoin, really, because there wasn't that same programmability of a smart contracting platform. So when they began looking at Ethereum, they did start finding some of these use cases that they were talking about. And there was this programmable aspect, and maybe there were people looking at it for supply chain management or what have you. But, they always ran into the sticking point that we've been talking about for many years, which is this privacy issue. If you're an enterprise in particular, you care deeply about the privacy of your data and who has access to that data. So we've talked a lot about, like, one of the primary use cases for Secret Network to be secure data sharing, the ability for an enterprise to share data securely with another enterprise or some other entity, under a certain circumstance to whom they want, under whatever conditions are designed. And then the data is shared under those circumstances to exactly the person that it should be shared to. There's a lot of demand for those types of use cases. What I don't think there is a lot of understanding just yet on the part of enterprises what's possible with all of these different permissionless networks. They've had a lot of education around here's what private enterprise permissioned blockchains can do for you. Or maybe they're familiar enough with Ethereum to know there's some potential. But they're not as familiar with like Secret Network only because we're probably one of the newer projects, even though we've been years in development. Now we're finally in a position to talk to enterprises and walk them through some of these key use cases and onboard them into our ecosystem. It's not something we could have done a few years ago because A, the technology wasn't ready, and B, the enterprises weren't ready. Today, I think we're finally right place, right time.
It's really exciting, especially because you're the first leading this sort of part of the quadrant that has emerged with all the different types of blockchains. And in that context, obviously, you're aware of those permissioned enterprise-based blockchains that do exist, and also led by largely the corporate initiative. Given that there's been so much attention from enterprise, from businesses, from the mainstream sector, have you had conversations with anyone yet? You mentioned it so early, but surely you would know right now that you do have something that's quite unique. You've got the secret sauce, literally. Are you having these conversations out there?
We're having those conversations. We have a very interesting ecosystem in that we're already very decentralized. We have a number of different development teams contributing to the network, and we have a number of different nodes operating in the network. And then we have the foundation where we take more of like an educational approach, and we do these sorts of appearances where we get a chance to talk about the network and educate people about its key value proposition relative to everything that's come before it. So all of these different entities are having their own conversations with enterprises, helping onboard them into our ecosystem. So I can't really speak for any other entity in our ecosystem where those conversations are. For example, Enigma is a development company that's one of the core contributors to the network. They have plenty of conversations with enterprises. I know they're still actively collaborating with a few, including Intel. So they will continue to, do their own educational initiatives to onboard enterprises, but so will the foundation. And so will the other like dozens of nodes that are operating in the network who, have their own stake in the ecosystem. So will all the developers from the ecosystem who are building their own, finance applications, credit applications, authentication and access control applications. It's actually quite a broad ecosystem. It's more akin to being like, if I were to re-ask your question, like, is Ethereum having conversations with enterprises? It doesn't make any sense really in the context of Ethereum, because like, who is Ethereum in that question? But I'm sure that the EEA, right, the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, exists to bring sort of these interests together. So we're looking to form more of those kinds of alliances within our own ecosystem and build bridges to other ecosystems, especially Ethereum as well. So we can bring some of our expertise around data privacy, combine it with their expertise around these permissionless finance ecosystems and so on, and just continue to build those relationships, knowing the piece of the puzzle that we're trying to provide as an ecosystem.
Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned the EEA, or the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, because a lot of work's been done with Baseline as well, and they are also trying to raise the bar in terms of that permissionless use case. But again, the key feature here that when we do the contrast with Ethereum is that you do have the secret source of this programmability, and you can be selective here. I don't know if that's the case so much yet with Ethereum, but certainly Baseline's working in that vein with consensus. So if we move back again to, I guess, some of the core tech aspects of this, I wanted to talk to you about the origins of this. I noticed that Cosmos is a very important part of this, as well as Tendermint. Do you want to just give us a rundown on how you built this from the ground up with your team?
So Secret Network was launched as a decentralized effort by a number of ecosystem participants, all people who had been very active in the blockchain space for quite a while, with a specific focus on privacy. So the network was launched to be a standalone blockchain that would preserve data privacy for smart contracts. That was always the initial vision. And part of that vision was enabled by, Tendermint and Cosmos SDK being able to come in and build on some of that work that had been done elsewhere in the ecosystem, knowing the roadmap that the Cosmos ecosystem has towards IBC, which is inter-blockchain communication, knowing that was like, they were trying to build this constellation of different pieces that could fit together to power the decentralized web, rather than having it be very centralized around a single chain or something to that effect. That was a very powerful concept that we latched onto. But in addition, a lot of the vision was based on what had been laid out in the very first white papers written by Enigma's CEO, Guy Ziskind, when he was back at MIT with myself and with the other Enigma co-founder. And those white papers were all about decentralizing privacy. Those were in 2015. Those were kind of the foundational vision for how could you combine blockchain technologies with data privacy technologies to create these decentralized computing platforms that provide privacy by default to computations. Now you fast forward, right? Since 2015, now those papers, I think, have something like 2,000 combined citations. They're some of the most highly cited papers in the blockchain space. I don't know the exact figure, but like, I think top 10. And that just goes to show how powerful this concept of privacy has become in the intervening years for blockchain space at large, mostly because, you know, the privacy problem is so inherent to their design. So you combine all of that thinking from the initial white papers, plus all the development work that went on in our ecosystem to build on top of Tendermint in order to create this unique functionality. We combined a lot of expertise around secure hardware and encryption to create this network whereby every node in the network now has the ability to run computations over encrypted data. Okay,
so obviously, there's a significant number of nodes there. I want to talk about that in relation to DeFi as a title, because the more nodes, the better, arguably. But also in that sense, how do you fit with the narrative of DeFi, knowing that you do have that selective aspect and you do have the privacy? Because at the very end point of the continuum, you know, if we're a hardcore DeFi maximalist, even KYC AML is an issue for those parties. So where do you fit along there when we compare you to those DeFi maxis from Ethereum?
It really, I guess this goes back to, again, definitional questions, because depending on who you ask, DeFi is going to mean something different. It's a buzzword, and I mean that in the nice sense, but it's just that it can mean so many things to so many different people. It stands for decentralized finance in theory, but there's so many aspects of DeFi today that are not decentralized at all, or they have much more to do with speculation than actual like financial systems, like credit systems or securitization systems. So I'll take the word aside for a second of DeFi, and I'll focus on what you're saying about, like, for example, KYC and AML. We're a platform in the sense that Ethereum is a platform. Applications built on these platforms, they might be fully permissionless in the sense that they don't want, you know, they don't really want anything to do with any of that. They want to be fully permissionless. They don't want to have to think about those questions. You can build an application like that on Ethereum or on Secret or any other blockchain. There's no guarantee anybody's going to use it because your users might have those concerns. Now on Secret, because we're talking about programmable privacy, you can imagine building an application on Secret where you can only be a whitelisted address interacting with these applications. So the application is protecting your privacy, but you can be sure that every address interacting with the application has gone through some sort of off-chain KYC process to have had their whitelisted address in order to interact with that application. Right. Like, there's a lot of things in the design space you can be doing to ensure that if you are some sort of enterprise that's very conscious about those issues, you should be interacting with Secret DeFi, because those applications can give you the privacy guarantees you need while also ensuring that you're interacting only with registered and known parties. It's again, like, what's programmable about this is, for privacy, is you can know that you're dealing with a good, like, well-meaning regulated entity, but not necessarily know their exact identity, not necessarily know their exact position, not necessarily know exact price of the trade until it's executed. Like, you can imagine doing some sort of decentralized dark pool product, which we are working on. And like, when you take all of that together, you can see that's very powerful because you have the choice of what's private and what's public. You try to do this whole thing on Ethereum, it gets really challenging to do any of this when everything is public by default. Going back to the toothpaste analogy, hard to make something private once it's out there. Yes, once it starts private, you can just start building up the application layer, the ability to expose what's needed to the right parties, or to have an off-chain mechanism for ensuring that, you know, somebody is whitelisted in a way they should be. They have a certain type of reputation, for example. That doesn't have to necessarily be something determined on chain. for it to be a functional application.
Got it. And it also makes sure that you don't congest that network on chain as well. And on top of that, it also suits regulation, I would imagine, because in this instance, we're seeing now a lot more regulatory pressure from the top down in many countries, yours as well. And clearly, because you do have that public by default, there's arguably going to be more pressure to make sure that all the checks and balances are made when you start to see iterations happen that relate to business, for example. So do you feel like you're in a better position than, say, some of the scenarios we see play out with Ethereum? Not to suggest that they aren't doing some amazing work, but because you do have that selectivity or that ability to make sure that you can have that off-chain aspect.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a technologist primarily, and even more so, like I take an education focused. I don't really code anything in the context of secret network these days. So when I think about that question, I answer it from the question of, are users going to find more value in this? Will they be more secure? Will it attract more adoption than Ethereum? I think that, like, my personal perspective is that there's many more avenues for compliance still with something like Secret Network, or at least equal to an ecosystem like Ethereum, because there are those sorts of possibilities for application design. But I certainly think from a usability standpoint, that's where our primary advantage is. You leave aside some of the regulatory questions because that's always shifting. It changes by jurisdiction. And it's very poorly communicated today, just because the technology is so nascent. It's hard to say whether something is or isn't, because the guidance we expect to change. But from a product perspective and the usability perspective, we can very confidently say, we think what we're building is better for users. We think that it can be cheaper. We think that it can be safer. We think that the applications can work better. For example, like things that are built on Secret come with front-running resistance by design. And front-running is a massive issue for all of Ethereum-based DeFi. And it's something that you kind of get by default in Secret's DeFi ecosystem. If you build a DeFi application on it, because we have encrypted state for smart contracts, we mitigate that issue to a very large extent. And that I think is where we try to position the value of the network more so.
Okay, well, let's extend that, because if you do have all of that tech stack ready, which it's been building for some time, and you're live and operational, surely there's a strong inflow of experimentation of users as well. So do you want to give us a bit of a picture of where you're at currently with regard to usership and with regard to applications?
So, to give context, we're recording this at the end of January, but I'm not positive when we're going to release. So I'm going to give some hard dates, and hopefully the hard dates help people understand the roadmap. There's a chance if you're watching this, all of this has already happened. So here we are at the end of January in 2021. So the first big product that we released last year was actually a bridge. And the reason we prioritized a bridge is because we have always positioned Secret as a privacy hub for all public blockchains, all permissionless blockchains. It's not trying to be a standalone universe so much as it's trying to give this value of programmable privacy to all public blockchains. So the very first thing that we wanted to ensure was launched as like a primary application of sorts was a bridge to Ethereum. And the reason, obviously, to choose Ethereum is because of the massive amount of developer activity, user activity, DeFi activity. It's clear that a lot of people have found a lot of benefit from participating in Ethereum's ecosystem. So rather than saying you need to be doing everything you're doing on Ethereum, but do it on Secret instead, it was a way to say, keep your Ethereum assets, on Ethereum, but here's a way for you to create secret versions of those same assets on Secret Network. So the idea is, if you have Ethereum, you can send it over the bridge. You're locking it in the bridge on Ethereum. And in return, we give you Secret Ethereum, which is a privacy token on Secret Network that represents that Ethereum. And the reason you can do secret tokens on Secret Network is because, just like Ethereum, we're a smart contract platform. On Ethereum, these tokens are ERC20s, right? They're everywhere, and you send them everywhere. And some of them are extremely valuable. On Secret Network, they're SNP 20s, Secret Network Improvement Proposal 20. And we call them secret tokens for short. And so Secret ETH is a secret token representation of Ethereum. But you can also have Secret DAI, Secret Link, Secret Ocean, Secret any other ERC20. and you can get an equivalent token version on Secret Network. You can send it around the network, and every time you're sending that token around the network, it's privacy preserving, that interaction. So people can see that you did something with a token, but they can't see how much you hold. They can't see who you sent it to. And that's by design. And then we're also launching a number of products within the Secret ecosystem that take Secret tokens as inputs. The first two of which are coming in the first half of February. So that's why I set the timing here. One is a auctions platform. So you can auction any Secret token for any other Secret token. You can solicit a bunch of private bids. So you can say, I'm going to accept, 5 bids, minimum bid is this, the auction closes here, the highest bid will win. So you submit the bids, but nobody else can see which bids are being submitted. So the auction can't be manipulated, and you get a lot better economic outcome. Now imagine you could do this for any type of asset, right? Not just Secret tokens, but you could, of course, auction Secret ETH for Secret DAI. And now you have just the ability to do these kinds of dark pool block sales on Secret Network. So that's
Very
one
cool.
product we're really excited about.
Wow.
That's very unique to Secret Network. But we're also launching an AMM. And everybody seems to, be into AMMs. Everybody wants to build an AMM, launch an AMM, and they do it just for fun. For us, we actually think the user experience with Secret is dramatically better than having an AMM on Ethereum. There's 3 main reasons. One is that we're cross-chain. Anywhere that we've built a bridge to, we will have liquidity in our AMM. So Ethereum to start for sure, and any assets that are native to Secret. But with IBC launching and Cosmos, we'll also be able to support any of these other Tendermint assets that have also implemented IBC. So you could be able to trade your Secret ETH against Secret Atom, for example. And that's very powerful and not something you can do as easily on Ethereum. Another component that I talked about is front-running resistance. The idea that this is a safer AMM to use as a user because you don't have bots coming in and taking a better price from you when you try to interact with it. It's a massive problem on Ethereum and on Secret Network, because every time you interact with the AMM contract, that interaction, it's encrypted. It cannot be seen by the miner, right? The node that's actually performing the computation. So it can't be front run in the same sense. You have that protection as a user. You get a better price, you get better execution. The third reason is, just cost, because right now fees in DeFi are insane. But obviously fees in Secret, because it's a smaller network and coded differently, it's a lot more reasonable to want to do trades on Secret Network. So hopefully between, this cross-chain ability, the front-running resistance, and the cost advantages, that's already reason enough for somebody to check it out. But in addition to all of that, we also can, because we're a tokenizable platform, right? You can issue Secret tokens. You can have a governance token for the AMM. You can have a governance token for the auction platform. You can have a governance token for anything. It's a secret.
It's a secret
if you want to think of it that way.
But
right?
when we talk about this, it's really quite amazing. And I don't often say that word, but there's so many different, facets to what's coming for you. And if people really understand and play back what you just said, especially that part, it was really smart of you to start with the network effects of Ethereum, even though, when we look at the tech stack of Cosmos, for example, and obviously that direct line, they iterated beyond Ethereum. And you see, next year and the year after that, we'll see other blockchain entities do that. Right. But having that network effects is everything from the start, and having those devs really participating in that system. So let's talk about that and what it means. So having that support from Ethereum rather than that competitive sort of positioning means that you have the support of all of Ethereum, then you have all the support of Cosmos. And I'm guessing you're going to have the support of other blockchains in the context of composability, in the context of what suits you. Will you start to look at other blockchains like, for example, Polkadot? They're really hot right now. They do have a different agenda, different design. But yeah, I need to ask that question because you're agnostically positioned, but certainly have a strong connection with Ethereum.
We'll go where the demand is ultimately. The demand primarily now for DeFi has been native to Ethereum. So it's the bridge you build for a DeFi application. But, if this demand exists, let's say in the Polkadot ecosystem, but there's also, Binance Smart Chain ecosystem and a bunch of other emerging ecosystems that want to provide this kind of native asset issuance and native liquidity, we're going to go where the demand really is. All of these bridges, they just demand developer attention is what it is. But if that developer attention and demand exists, or you can imagine having grants available for developers who wanted these bridges to exist, then I think all of this is very feasible. It's just that we haven't announced that we're doing it. The other thing that's great about this is Secret, even though we're positioning it as a hub for all public blockchains, it is a standalone ecosystem. You can build applications that never touch anything else. You can issue your own secret token that represents some sort of real world interest, or that represents some sort of access to an application. You issue the token on Secret Network. Now it is a privacy preserving, let's say it's like an NFT, right? A privacy preserving NFT native to Secret Network that can live in your secret wallet, and it's available on the AMM, or you can auction it, whatever you want to do. But ownership is private. So if you do end up buying it and you have it, now you just have this token, and it's not as though there's definitely a lot of use cases for NFTs where you don't want ownership to be public.
Absolutely.
And it's more about, like, in some cases you do, and you have that ability to program it, but in a lot of cases you don't. So what we're trying to do is unlock all of that universe. It doesn't have to touch Ethereum at all. It can just be the back end to some sort of Web3 application. We actually had a hackathon team build something that combined Ethereum, IPFS, and Secret Network to build an access control application that used a lot of this functionality. And you would never necessarily know that you were interacting with Secret Network. It's the same way that ideally you probably wouldn't know at some point you were interacting with Ethereum when you used a Web3 application. But because we unlock all of those different use cases, and because only we can unlock it because of the privacy by default design, that's why I'm so excited about what people are going to build and how we're going to grow, because it'll just be the only place that all of this is really possible. This sandbox.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not even a dev, and I'm excited for the devs, quite sincerely, because once they get in and understand and unpack what you can do, and the whole point, if they haven't experimented yet, I don't know if they're going to cross back, to be honest, because it's just adding more to the equation, and also being interoperable with all of the blockchains that they love, whether they come from Cosmos or Ethereum or other. They're certainly going to see that there is that cross collaboration and that support. But then there's the question of, are you layer 1 or layer 2, or are you layer 0? Because you do so much. You're your own whole entity, you're your whole eco. But on top of that, you also do operate, by supporting directly these other blockchains.
Yeah, and that's, again, like, the issue is not so much like how do we define ourselves. The issue is, like, how do we push ourselves into these boxes that have already been created, where the terms themselves don't really make any sense, right? And that's really the problem. Like, everything got called layer 1, layer 2, layer 0, layer 7, or we say something is DeFi or isn't DeFi. What we're realizing is, with a lot of these platforms, right, we're making up the definitions on the fly, and then we're trying to figure out after the fact, what is this new thing that's been created? If we were a lot more similar to something that already existed, it would be a lot easier to say, oh, well, then it's a layer 1. I think it's really exciting that we can't sufficiently answer that question for Secret, because it tells me that we've built something that's actually differentiated. Using the definitions that I'm familiar with, I would say that I would think of us as a layer 1 first and foremost, because things happen natively on Secret. We have a native coin for the network. It's used for staking. It's used for governance. It's used for network fees and computation. It pays for gas, just like Ethereum. So in that regard, it's definitely a layer 1. But in the way that we've prioritized the building of bridges, in the way that we can power Web3 applications that might involve, like, a different confluence of protocols and pillars, like, then I think maybe we're more of maybe not layer 2, maybe middleware is the way to think about it. I mean, is Filecoin layer 1, layer 2? Like, when you start not being able to answer those questions really satisfactorily, then I think you've really got something magical that you're looking at. If you know the answer, like, if you're looking at a layer 1, I'm not sure it's going to beat Ethereum. If you just know it's just like an Ethereum clone, and they made it a little faster, or they made it a little, like, they slapped a new color on it.
Well,
it just doesn't work that way.
It also means you're iterating, which is really exciting. You're doing something really that's progressive, and people are paying attention now because there is a use case. Now let's talk about that token, because that there's a lot of controversy sometimes when we try to, again, box in a token by definition. And we've seen from the beginnings of everything from that first magical moment with Bitcoin, and then it was defined as a utility token. And we even saw the likes of Ethereum initially do their launch, raise their capital, but very quickly prove their utility. Now, what are you? You talked about staking and governance, and we heard this huge narrative come forth about governance tokens. But what are you by design as a token, and what are you for?
Yeah, Secret is used for, I'll restate them, but from its inception as a Tendermint chain, as this chain launched, Secret was used from day one for network fees, staking, and governance. So for people who are listening who aren't as familiar with the Cosmos and Tendermint universe, these chains rely on delegated proof of stake. So it's not a proof of work chain, it's proof of stake, and you can delegate to certain nodes in the network who are operating. As a result, if you are delegating to one of these nodes, you can vote in on-chain governance. If a proposal is raised by somebody in the community, you can deposit tokens to make a proposal. You use your own tokens to vote on that proposal. Pass a certain threshold, it passes. And this governs all sorts of things about the network. It can govern the inflation rate. It can govern how funds are spent from an on-chain community pool. So it's actual governance, and it's native to the chain. And Secret is also the staking coin. So you stake Secret as a node, or you delegate it as a delegator. Over time, the network is inflationary. So new Secret is being created, SCRT. And the nodes and the delegators receive a share of that inflation in return for locking up their stakes and securing the network. And that's the other main utility.
Sorry to interrupt, but that's also the same as the second iteration of Ethereum with their POS shift from the proof of stake. But yet they are still regarded as a utility token, as that core coin, I call them, that fuels the entire eco. So by definition, if we to understand the nature of the token itself, despite the dPoS firing engine that's really pushing everything forward, is that still a utility token, given that it has arguably other functionalities as well?
So staking and governance are those two things, but the big one is that it's used for gas in the network. So any Ethereum-based application that you're interacting with, right? No matter which ERC20 you're trying to use, you need ETH in your wallet to move it around the network. So ETH has that native utility to say, like, it pays for things. And those fees go to the miners on Ethereum. And on Secret, the Secret that's paid also goes to the nodes in the network and then out to the delegators, right? That is the economic system. And that's why demand for applications built on Secret drive demand for SCRT itself. You must pay it as gas in the network. There's no way to pay Ethereum as gas to use a Secret contract. Now you could take Ethereum, turn it into Secret Ethereum, turn it into Secret, and then use Secret for gas. So because we have bridges, you can take assets from other ecosystems, convert it back into the native gas of the network. But what we're talking about is a native ecosystem where Secret has that inherent utility. From my perspective, I just described three killer types of utility. Staking, so for network security and inflation. We've talked about computation and transactional fees, so you need Secret to actually use the network. And then governance being the last piece. I don't necessarily think that pure governance coins are really actual things. They're kind of slapped on an application. And that makes me nervous. But the fact that it's one of three possible utilities, and the fact that it's we've had, I think, 29 proposals pass in the network, something like that. Somewhere between 25 and 29 proposals have successfully passed. I think we've had around 30 proposed. And these have all been voted on in chain. And you're seeing millions of dollars in value being used to vote on the outcomes of these governance proposals. And they've had real consequences. In fact, the only reason the foundation exists is because it was proposed in an on-chain governance proposal, and it was funded by an on-chain governance proposal, and it continues to receive funding through network inflation. That's the only way the foundation is actually resourced. We never did any sort of public or private fundraising. We're entirely funded by the network itself. So because of this unique model for the network and the unique model for the foundation, we're a very unique ecosystem. I think it's hard for people to really wrap their heads around, but that's where you want to be. In a stage of growth like we're seeing for blockchain and public blockchains in particular, you don't want to be sort of like Ethereum, but smaller. You want to be something kind of completely different, but that makes Ethereum better. And that's how we feel about ourselves.
And you are clearly articulating that to me right now. So let's look at the token, I guess, from the speculative mindset. Many come in and they want to bet on the blockchain, but in reality, that token should correlate with the growth of the ecosystem. Often because of speculation, they don't, and you see this very disparate sort of hype train that takes
Sure.
things forward. But what about in your instance? How do you make sure that there's growth in that token to reflect less about money though in that question, but more about development?
Yeah, the only thing I can speak to really, right? Like I don't control the prices of anything, secret or otherwise. I have no such power. All we can do is show that there's increasing demand for the use of our network over time. And so the big metric that I look at is gas use in the network. And I think that a lot of people use that in Ethereum as well. It's like how much gas is being spent in the network, or how much in fees is being paid on Uniswap is how you would say, how much are people valuing Uniswap? So that's the main metric I look at, is the network being used more and more every day. And over time, I assume that this demand is going to work itself out. But the other piece of that, if you just think about markets, for example, I used to be a trader for many years. So if you just think about demand and supply, demand is what I'm talking about when it comes to like good applications, useful applications, high value propositions for users. Supply is how much of this coin can I actually get? And the main way that you get secret is by running a node or by staking in the network. That's the intended way to get secret, so that the people with the highest stake in the ecosystem continue to be able to use the ecosystem. The idea being, if you're an application developer for our ecosystem or an application user, you are the most highly incentivized to help secure the network. And so therefore you receive a share of inflation as a result. That system works really well. And that way, if you're a speculator and you're going to the exchange and you're saying, I just want to like buy something and hope that it triples in price, well, you're going to find that in our ecosystem, most people are staking their coins because they're committed to the ecosystem long term. And they're locked up in the same way that people have locked like billions of dollars just waiting for ETH2. We have many millions of dollars of secret locked up in staking because people support the ecosystem. So if you have a lot of demand and then you don't have a lot of supply because people are committed to using their secret for its intended purposes of network security and governance, in addition to fees, then the demand to pay secret-based fees, it exceeds the supply that's actually being generated. And
yes, and we can see where you're going with that.
That's the only way I can.
Yes,
that's the only way I can think about it.
And I appreciate that, because that was well explained without saying directly that the price would tend to correlate with the staking, which we've seen happen.
You can't control it at all.
No, you can't. And the thing is that you can assess the success of staking mechanisms built in, and that's why many other blockchains do the same thing. Is that the more productive, the more used, and with those gas indicators, the more we'll see that reflected in that token price. I can say that, you can't, but that's what it seems to be. Now, I just want to get quick, because I know you've got to go. I'm going to call this part one, Tor, because I really have enjoyed this beginning conversation. I barely got into any of the questions that I wanted to ask you, but that's because
it happens.
It does, but you really did explain some very important parts of what you're doing right now. And I really would encourage people. I certainly am going to educate myself far more before I speak to you again about the Secret Network. But just for a quick sort of mention, what can we expect coming forward? Rather than just inject some FOMO and hype into this, what's some of those really genuine partnerships that are coming that mean something? We're not here to P&D, you're not here to pump and dump. We're here to actually build this. So what's some cool stuff that's going to happen?
I'll just close by saying, like, this DeFi ecosystem we're building with Secret, we started there because that's where the demand is, right? And we want to build something that people want to use. So that's what you can expect to see over the next month or two, is a lot of these sorts of liquidity focused applications launching, because people really want to have blockchain assets, be able to use them, trade them, move them, auction them. That's what people want to do. But there's one use case in particular that has already been announced that I'm excited about, which is, access control use cases. There's a company called Humanode that's building using Secret Network, and they're all about biometric user authentication, but decentralized biometric user authentication. And those are the kinds of sci-fi use cases that I hope next time we're talking, I'm coming on here and telling you that we've got a dozen more of those, because I would love people thinking beyond DeFi when it comes to using a decentralized privacy preserving computation network like Secret Network. The sky's the limit. Think about that. Don't think you have to copy paste something from Ethereum. You can really build whatever you want, and the foundation and our whole ecosystem is here to support you. We have I'm rounding here, but it's about a $20 million ecosystem pool that's available for developers looking for early stage grant funding, or if they have bridges that they want to build. So come talk to us. We're on Twitter, Secret Network. Best way to reach out, or you can write to info@secret, SECRET.foundation. But our website is SCRT, just like the coin, .network. And those are the best 3 places. And you can find me pretty much everywhere all the time. I don't log off.
Yes, it's true. I mean, you are available to make this interview happen. I really appreciate that. For all the links below, I'll make sure that there's some that Tor's mentioned and some more as well. But don't forget, the buzzwords right now coming from this interview are things like public by default. They have their own ecosystem. Really understand that, because they aren't just a bridge, which Tor explained, and they certainly are making sure that they keep those relationships with these very strong blockchains that have really already had a major impact in our space right now, and they're forging ahead with development and also likely to make more bridges in the future. Tor, it's really exciting to hear what you're doing. I can definitely see a niche use case once upon a time, but no longer anymore. This is opening up the door with an absolute need for programmable smart contracts. If you don't know much about smart contracts, make sure you educate yourself, because this is building on that narrative as well. So once again, Tor, thank you very much for the very first discussion. I'm definitely going to book in another one for much more, but don't forget, learn more about Secret Network as well, and the links will be below. Thanks again, Tor.
Cheers, Ben. Thank you.